The late 80s saw the release of several 16-bit gaming systems. Back then, we talked about systems in terms of bits, even though hardly anyone even knew what a bit was. We just knew more bits was supposedly better. So 16 bits should be twice as good as 8, right? Of course. In 1988, the Sega Mega Drive was released in Japan, and later in 1990, the SNES followed. For most gamers, these were the two 16-bit systems. Sega Mega Drive, of course, being the Genesis in America. It made a lot of sense to have two competing companies, particularly in the US, where we have two competing political parties. We were very familiar with the one versus one setup we had. Except that wasn't really true. Before either of those two game consoles saw the light of day, there was the PC Engine. Released in Japan in 1987, the PC Engine became the TurboGrafx 16 in the US in 1989. But what happened? Why is it that only now are most gamers discovering this system? Why was it that even most hardcore gamers of the day hadn't even heard of it, or if they had, they'd heard very little at best? Well, the reasons are debatable, but the lack of good advertising was undoubtedly one. The PC Engine / TurboGrafx 16 outsold the Genesis in Japan, which of course was known as the Mega Drive there, but was a terribly distant third place in the US to both the SNES and Genesis. In fact, the Nintendo Entertainment System, which is fully 8-bit, outsold the TurboGrafx 16. My experience with the system was limited mainly to a handful of advertisements in gaming magazines. I never got the chance to hold the TurboGrafx 16 controller in my hands, but if I had, what would I have thought? There's no way to go back in history, but we can always try. Let me just add a quick note that technically the CPU on the system is 8-bit while the GPU is 16-bit. So for all of you technical critics out there, yeah, I said it, okay? The system is technically not a 100% straight up 16-bit system. This is my nostalgia factor look back on the TurboGrafx 16, and we'll be focusing on the library of games. After all, who cares about the technical specs if the games aren't good, right? We will not be covering any of the expansions, such as the CD-ROM. It'll just be the straight up original TurboGrafx 16 and its card-based games. We'll stick primarily with exclusive titles, but there are a few ports in here as well. Let's get started with this system's mascot, Bonk. I've chosen to focus on Bonk's Revenge. Bonk is to the TurboGrafx 16 what Mario and Sonic are to Nintendo and Sega. Bonk's Adventure was bundled with certain console packages, and there's no denying it's a good game. You control Bonk, a boyish-looking character with an oversized head. You use this giant noggin to headbutt enemies as well as dive headfirst onto them. Yes, don't try that in real life. You can get power-ups to give you additional abilities such as temporary invincibility, and there are plenty of health-restoring items lying around. The graphics are colorful and vibrant, and the gameplay feels pretty solid and fun. Bonk's Revenge is very similar and is really more of the same, a good thing if you like Bonk. Having said all that, I just can't shake the feeling that ultimately Bonk feels like a second-rate platformer. It just doesn't have that highly polished, control-perfect feel that Mario and Sonic do. It comes very close, but ultimately falls a bit short. The music is just okay. Play Bonk side by side with Sonic the Hedgehog or Super Mario World, and you'll see what I mean. Nonetheless, Bonk's Adventure and Bonk's Revenge are two great games and worth a try for any fan of classic platformers. They are available on the Wii Virtual Console as well as the PlayStation Network, so check them out. Sticking with the platformers genre, next up is Legendary Axe and Legendary Axe 2. I have to say that I really like Legendary Axe. It has excellent graphics, decent music, precise controls, and really fun gameplay. There are power-ups to collect and some good enemy variety. Legendary Axe 2 is more of the same, although I just didn't like it as much as the first for some reason. These are two great 16-bit platformers that any fan of the genre should not go without playing. As far as I know, there's no place you can purchase these titles for download, but they don't charge too much for them on eBay from what I've seen. I'd love to see these come out on the Virtual Console and PlayStation Network, or what's even better is if we could get like a collection of all the best of the TurboGrafx 16 games together, call it the Best of the TurboGrafx 16, and release it for all the modern game systems. That would be awesome. Not exclusive to the TurboGrafx 16 is the famous Splatterhouse. This series has a cult following, as evidenced by people like the Happy Video Game Nerd, who did an entire Splatterhouse series. You can click the link in the video description if you want to see his videos. I'm actually not a big fan. It's a good action platformer, but I'd much rather play a game like Legendary Axe. I guess this game is all about the atmosphere. It has ghoulishly gory monsters everywhere, and you kill them in some pretty sadistic ways. You use a 2x4, at least I think it's a 2x4, to smash enemies into the background wall. Monsters turn into gooey piles of liquefied innards, and bloody worm-like creatures burst forth from the insides of other monsters. The enemies in the game are genuinely creepy in that they look like very mutated, grotesque humanoids. Splatterhouse is definitely worth checking out, but it's much easier to find this game on a host of other systems. Ninja Spirit is essentially a run-and-gun style game, just without the guns. You can switch between a variety of weapons which all power up very nicely. You can collect up to 2 shadow versions of yourself, and when positioned correctly, you become super powerful and can pretty much hit anything on the screen anywhere with a single attack. When you die, you feel really weak because it's just you and your low-level weapons again, and that sucks. Ninja Spirit is available on several other systems, but the easiest to buy it for is definitely the Virtual Console. It's worth a few dollars if you want some old-school fun. The TurboGrafx 16 had a lot of really good shoot-em-ups, but I'm picking the most obvious poster boy for the genre, and that's Blazing Lasers. Known mostly for its unique weapons, Blazing Lasers has solid gameplay with nice-looking visuals and sound effects. The voices are a little too quiet, and it's sometimes hard to hear, but from what I can tell, the guy is speaking in Japanese. He's using the Japanese pronunciation for things like homing missiles, which is based on the same English word. I'm not a shoot-em-up fan in general, but fans of the genre speak highly of this game. It's also available on the Virtual Console and PSN, too. Military Madness is a hex-based, turn-based strategy game, of which there were a precious few for the consoles. These games were always much better on the PC in my opinion, but hey, to each his own. If you are a fan of this genre on the consoles, then this is one to check out. You control various units that go head-to-head with the enemy units. You have to traverse the terrain, which actually modifies your effectiveness in combat. If you have the high ground, you are at a distinct advantage. You get to see little animations play out when your units enter combat, and that's really cool. It's available for the Virtual Console if you're interested. Well, actually, it's still available for the Virtual Console even if you're not interested. There were very few true RPGs released for the system, but if it's an old-fashioned dungeon crawl you want, then you got it. Enter Double Dungeons, where you can actually play 2-player. The gameplay is extremely basic, and you do very little other than push one button. There's no inventory screen to my knowledge, and not a lot else to do other than wandering around and killing creatures. I found a store, but figuring out how to buy something was actually kind of difficult. One very surprising thing is that you move super fast in the game. Wow, look at that speed. I found myself playing this quite a bit. I intended to just capture a few minutes of gameplay footage, and before I knew it, I'd sunk over 15 minutes into the game. Surprisingly simple yet fun, as long as you are comfortable with the more hardcore RPG experience. Double Dungeons is also available for the Virtual Console. I have to say that, although I really like Double Dungeons, I'd much rather prefer Lady Sword, which unfortunately is only available in Japanese. Despite being able to read everything that the characters are telling me, because I do speak some Japanese, I still find myself dying constantly. In fact, the first enemy I encountered killed me in 2 shots, and that sucks. But regardless, Lady Sword is one to check out as well if you can get a hold of it. Saving what I consider to be the best for last, the TurboGrafx 16 had a shameless ripoff of Legend of Zelda known as Newtopia. Why do I call it a ripoff? Well, you control a character with a sword and shield, there are 2 item slots, you collect and use items, you bomb walls to open secret passageways, you enter into rooms and talk to people, there are several dungeons where you have to find the key to the boss door, after defeating the boss you receive an item, and when you collect all the items you put together the entire object. Sound familiar? Well, it should. It's a Zelda clone. But you know what? Who cares if it's a ripoff? It's an awesome game. Not quite on par with the polish of the Legend of Zelda series, Newtopia is great nonetheless. If you liked Zelda, you will like this game. The gameplay is solidly fun, the graphics are good, the music is good, and the story is passable. Newtopia 2 improved on the original by now giving you the ability to move and attack diagonally. These are 2 amazingly good games, and they deserve more recognition than they've gotten. I suspect the blatant Zelda copying is what has held the game back, but I don't fault it for that. You can copy down the password to continue playing, or you can use what's called the file cabinet to save the game. Both games are available by the Virtual Console and PSN, so there's no excuse not to go out and buy them. Seriously, buy these games, you won't regret it. Well, that was just a sampling of some of my favorite titles on the TurboGrafx 16. There are undoubtedly a handful of TurboGrafx 16 fans out there who are freaking out because I didn't include their favorite title, or some title that they think is a must-play for the system. Well, oh well, I can't cover them all, and I don't care to cover games that I don't personally have an interest in, so yeah, take that. And with that, I'll leave you with a montage of other titles in the system that didn't get a spot of their own. Make sure to click the thumbs up button and subscribe while you enjoy the rest of the video.